So we already have our if statements here, and if I were to just take this down to 10, you'd have a really long code just to simply count to 10, right? If, it would keep going. So doing if statements to do this doesn't really make sense. So instead, if I just execute this, and obviously it'll, takes that long of code just to count to 3. So instead of using nested if statements, I'm going to use a while loop. So while, and example is still equal to 0, so example, and let's just say is less than 10, because, that we're just going to count to 10. Now, in theory, it'll keep doing that until example equals 10. So if I simply, print example, and then, I don't know, example will equal example plus 1. Now when I execute this, it went 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, so on and so forth. It made it up to 10. Now I guess if I wanted to include 10, I would use an equal sign here, and now it'll go up to 10. However, so let's take a look at what's happening. So while example, which is currently 0, is less than or equal to 10, I'm going to print the number. So I'm going to print 0, which it did. And then after I print 0, I'm going to change the example. So now it's not 0, it's now 0. Example is now that 0 plus 1. So now it's 1. And then, that's the end of the loop. I guess I'm going back up to the top of the loop. Okay, example is 1. Is 1 less than or equal to 10? Yes. In that case, print example. What was example? Oh, example was 1. It printed 1. Oh, and then, okay, now that 1 is now going to equal 1 plus 1, so it's 2. And we're going to go back to the loop. So 2 is 2 less than or equal to 10, so on and so forth. And it's going to keep going and going and going until it reaches that end point. So that's 3 lines of code compared to what was bound to be 30 lines of code for the nested if statements. Much simpler and much easier to understand this. And do simply this. Once again, remember your indentations determine where it is. You should auto get the indentation after you do the colon and hit enter. And if you're not getting the indentations, chances are you forgot about that colon. Now, of course, if I were to flip this around here and put this in front of the printing statement and execute it, I'll get different results because I'm adding the 1 before I print. So instead of going from 0 to 10, it went from 1 to 11. So in this case, if I wanted just from 1 to 10, I would have to get rid of that equal sign and then do it again, and now it goes from 1 to 10. So it's a matter of just troubleshooting and syntax and which one's happening before which. So remember, the lines of code go 1, 2, it goes in order. So whatever you have where is going to determine your end result down here. Now then, with that being said, what would happen if I were to say subtract 1? Because example starts as 0, and then example is going to be example minus 1, so it'll be negative 1. Negative 1 is still less than 10, and then it'll eventually go to negative 2. Negative 2 is still less than 10, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5. Essentially, in theory, if I were to do this, this loop would never end. I would never reach my ending point, right? So, if I were to execute this, yep, and you see it's going, it's going, it's going, it's going, it's going. It's constantly going. It's gonna never ever stop. So I'm just gonna delete that, and I'll hit execute there, because there we go. Now we're back to nothing. So, you don't want to have an endless loop. So be careful of what it is you're putting in. So you're generally going to want to have some sort of counter in a loop, and you want to make sure that that counter is going to physically end, because if not, you're going to, slowly but surely eventually crash your computer. Now, some code programs have a way to recognize this and immediately go, oh no, that's going to be an endless loop, and stop you from even letting you do that. As we can see with this, oh no, it will let you do that. So please don't make endless loops. Now then, of course, you can also do this with strings as well as integers, but doing it with strings is going to be a little bit more tricky, and we'll save that for later. But right now, being able to make a while loop with integers correctly is, of course, the key ingredient here.